Gentlemen, I like Falcon. No, gentlemen, I love Falcon. I know it might not feel that way after how disappointed I was with their latest offering, at least their latest translated one, but I feel I should get it out of the way that Falcon is genuinely one of my favorite developers still around. Trails aren't their only series that I follow. I also like Zwei, I like Monstrum Nox, I even played Gurumi and Nayuta. I loved all of those, and of course my introduction to Falcon was, like with many others, through a series of hack-and-slash RPGs called Ys. And today, we join together here to discuss the latest entry in the series, the 9th entry with the subtitle of Monstrum Nox. Now, this entry isn't new to anyone who decided to purchase it on the PS4 since it was released there roughly 5 months ago, but it is new to the PC and Switch players since it was released just a few days ago into these platforms, July 8, 2021 to be precise. In that sense, it has been out for a while and has been discussed by many different people at this point in time, but the thing is, I never really cared about that, so time to throw another opinion in the pile. For those of you not familiar with the Ys series, it follows the adventures of Adol the Red, an adventurer that's called that because he's, well, red-haired, and his ex-thief best friend Doji as they get themselves into all kinds of trouble. All of the games, with one notable exception, have Adol as the player character, but you don't actually need to play them in order since each adventure is self-contained. They take place in completely new settings and feature completely new casts every time, and with a few exceptions when a character from a previous game shows up as a fan service cameo, but otherwise they're very standalone. Any Ys games is as good of an entry point as any other Ys games, especially considering how the gameplay has changed from entry to entry as well. So Monstrum Nox is as good of a time as any to jump into the franchise if you're wondering about that. However, I do have to mention that while you don't need previous Ys knowledge to understand this particular story, I do have to say that this game has a lot of callbacks to previous games, and instead of just Easter eggs, Adol's previous adventures do play a key part in the main story itself. You won't be confused by any plot points for this entry, since the characters will explain exactly what they want and what they mean when they say something, but unfortunately some twists and turns only hit you with full efficiency if you have previous experience with the series. They play a much bigger role around than, for example, they played in the previous entry, so be warned. But just what is the plot this time around anyway? Well, the setup is simultaneously simple and something you've probably seen before, and convoluted at the same time, somehow. You see, Adol decides his next stop in his adventuring life is at the city of Balduk, which is host to one of the world's largest, most impenetrable prisons, and in a delightfully meta twist, he ends up imprisoned by the Roman Empire, who are currently the rulers of the city, and thrown into this jail in order to be interrogated because of his previous adventures. Since he always gets into trouble, shipwrecks, and he finds legendary artifacts, and then he just straight up loses all of them between games, his jailers are obviously very suspicious about him and the threats he might pose for the Empire. Fortunately, he stages a prison break, and during it, he ends up cursed by a bullet shot from a mysterious woman named Aprilis and transformed into a monstrum, which is essentially a superpowered human being. And now, whenever the Greenwald Nox, which is basically a dark world filled with twisted monsters, encroaches upon the real world, he and a bunch of other people who also got cursed all get called together by Aprilis in order to protect reality by fighting these monsters. The curse does give him some pretty sick clothes, but unfortunately it imprisons both him and his fellow monstrum forever within the walls of Balduk. So now it's up to him to make friends and find a way to uncurse himself so he can get back to adventuring all around the world, with a few twists and turns along the way, of course. That's the basic setup, and we'll go back to it to talk about the writing later, because I'm going to vaguely spoil quite a few things about it, and I don't want to spoil you if you want to go in blind. Instead, let's talk about the gameplay and how the monstrum powers manifest themselves. If you played Lacrimosa of Dana, then you already know exactly how Monstrum Nox plays out. It is pretty much the exact same game, down to the raid battles returning, but with a new layer of polish and pushing the engine to its absolute limits. Which doesn't mean it is not running on spaghetti code. In fact, it's honestly impressive how spaghetti the code of this game must be, since Ranting, quite possibly the greatest port developer alive, still couldn't get a stable 120 FPS, even though the game geometry wouldn't look out of place on the PlayStation 2. But lucky for me, I play on 1080p targeting 60 FPS, and within those specific limits, the game runs just fine. Now, you might be wondering, just what exactly are the limits being pushed here? And the answer is actually quite simple. It's the size and complexity of the playable maps. Ys has always had small maps divided by loading screens, and while this game still brings up loading screens when you enter a dungeon or go from an interior area to an exterior area or vice versa, the city of Balduq itself is completely seamless, being quite possibly the biggest, most complex environment not divided by loading screens in a Falcom game so far. And of course, to enhance this even further, we are introduced to the biggest difference in gameplay from the previous entry, the Monstrum abilities. Each Monstrum has a different ability that gives more movement options or enhances your ability to explore and quickly find targets on the environment. You start with only the Crimson line, which allows you to quickly teleport yourself to preset points, but it isn't long before you unlock the ability to run up walls and glide using giant wings, and the best part is that while like the previous games, you are encouraged to constantly switch party members since each member has a different attack type that specific enemies are weak to, once you get a Monstrum into your party, all party members can use that Monstrum's ability, so you don't have to switch them up in order to just explore. And explore I did. The city of Balduq isn't exactly what comes to mind when you think about organic open worlds that are all the rage nowadays. There are NPCs doing NPC things all over the city, but overall it mostly carries some of that PS2 DNA in that a lot of places look unnaturally big and the lack of details can make it seem eerily empty at times. But that didn't distract me from the treasure chests and glowing flower petals, yes, petals that hide in every corner of the city. When you start fighting entire rooms hidden in different places that are only accessible with certain powers, it honestly becomes just a joy to explore every nook and cranny every time you get a new power to see just what you're going to find. It helps that Balduq isn't just a generic low fantasy medieval town with two-story shacks at best. No, it has towering cathedrals, colosseums, and market districts, and even a shanty town that's stuck in what looks like a giant corridor where the sun never shines, as it is between two gigantic stone structures, one of which houses the prison on top of it, and the other where the noble district is, so the rich people can literally look down on the peasants if they want. It's a pretty harsh contrast and a pretty interesting landscape. Each area also offers their own distinct theme that plays as you go in and out of them, which helps to really give each place its own distinct vibe as different parts of this behemoth of a city. The new movement options also greatly enhance the ability of the devs to play around with the level design itself, since now you can reach places you absolutely couldn't in previous entries. They can hide landmarks that allow you to fast travel to them once discovered at the absolute peak of the previously mentioned cathedral. They can also hide treasure above and far away from the normal path in dungeons, greatly increasing the level of verticality the player has to engage in if they want to find all of the hidden treasure. It's honestly just a fantastic plus to the already engaging fast-paced style of the Ys games. And this just might be me being biased since I prefer single city RPGs rather than RPGs that have multiple villages that are just completely unrealistic and just couldn't sustain themselves with the number of people actually living in them. But I think Balduq might just be one of my favorite settings in video games ever, right next to the city of Crossbell. Yep, Falcom did it again. The solution they came to halt player exploration before the intended time though is much more heavy-handed. You don't get to access the entire city at the start of the game, and you don't get to access more city districts as you unlock new powers to reach them, which admittedly wouldn't make much sense since how would the normal citizens access them without the powers after all. But the solution they came up with is to include giant barrier walls that won't allow you to access a certain part of the city, and in order for you to break the walls, you must first complete side quests and random encounters until you gathered 100 points of Nox. Then, a vortex will appear that will allow you to participate in a battle within the Grimwald Nox. If you succeed, then the barrier will break, allowing you to go further, rinse and repeat. The problem is, you can't break barriers whenever you want by grinding Nox. Since if you get more Nox after you broke a barrier to a new area, all you do is to summon a Greenwald Nos vortex instead that opens up a small extra area and then it just stops until you reach the next chapter. So unlike most modern open world games, your ability to explore the city is gated by story progress, which is unfortunate since being able to jump from district to district seamlessly is one of the game's greatest strengths. But just what does a Greenwald Nox entails anyway? Well, I mentioned before the Lacrimosa of Dana's raid battles, and indeed, a Nox battle is just a raid battle with another name, but just in case you didn't play Lacrimosa, allow me to sum it up. During a Nox battle, there is a giant crystal tower and a lot of black pillars that summon enemies. You must defeat the enemies before they reach the tower defense style, and you can spend crafting materials to make decoys and upgrade some helpful towers, though they are honestly mostly of minimal help and you can't place them where you want anyway, they just kind of exist to suck up your extra materials really, and that's all there is, some bare bones tower defense. Now make no mistake, they still have their charm and I like them as raid battles in the previous game. The main difference is, raid battles were optional and you could take them on whenever you felt like it. Nox battles are obligatory and they bring the usual exploration-focused gameplay to an absolute halt. In my personal opinion, one of the greatest assets of the Ys franchise, especially as they go along and go into its more modern era, is its fast-paced philosophy, about eliminating as much bullshit as possible and just letting the player enjoy and engage with the game at their own pace, usually a blazing fast one. A detail, for example, that most people don't really think about that much, that I really enjoy about these recent entries is the way the game saves. You get close to or above a specific artifact and the game instantly heals your characters and autosaves. No need to deal with menus to pick a save slot, no need to go through a menu to heal, just pass nearby and go on as fast as you can back towards adventure. It is a small detail that shows just how much care was put into not bothering the player with unnecessary clutter and keeping the game feeling light and breezy. Nox battles, however, fly right in the face of this philosophy. Instead of blasting through new areas of dungeons, quickly dispatching hundreds of enemies and unlocking dozens of treasure chests in new areas that encourage not only skillful swordplay, but also an adventurous exploration spirit of okay, I'm exaggerating, you only really need to look at the minimap to see if there's a chest nearby, but seeing that and trying to find it, especially with the new verticality options that allows them to be hidden in harder to find places, is just so much more engaging than being dropped in an empty field and waiting for enemies to be spawned. And since they die like flies anyway, occasionally you get an ambush pillar spawning right behind the crystal tower that you have to protect, because otherwise you'd be practically invincible. And the worst part is that, sure, it isn't a downright bad experience since you're still engaging with some damn good combat, but I still feel like if I was allowed to tackle them on my own terms, like in the previous game, I'd be more like, oh, that happened, like the raid battles, instead of, oh, that happened, like this time. At least there's an alternative battle style that pops up from time to time, where you must hunt down giant red gems called Lacrima and destroy them within a time limit, which is honestly just 200% better just by virtue of actually allowing you to use your cool movement skills, but they just pop up occasionally. Oh well. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that every single Greenwald Nox begins with a very low quality FMV, like a pre-rendered cutscene that's just of lower quality than the entire rest of the game, and there's nothing special about it that just couldn't be done in-engine? I have no idea why they did that, but it's honestly hilarious. But it's time we got back to the really fun stuff. The combat system itself is carried from the previous game and it's pretty simple. You use one button to attack, but you can also hold the right bumper and press any of the face buttons to unleash a different skill that has been previously set by you in the pause menu. You can also dodge attacks with the left bumper, and if you dodge at the very last moment, you slow down enemies. By pressing the right bumper at the right moment instead, you guard against the attack and turns all of your attacks into critical hits for a short period of time. You can even combo both of them together by dodging, then jumping into the attack you just dodged while the enemy is low to guard against the attack and get both advantages simultaneously. There's also the weakness system, in which every character has their own attack type that can exploit a specific enemy weakness, thus encouraging you to switch between characters often. However, this system isn't the be-all and end-all of combat, unlike in, say, Persona, where exploiting weaknesses is of the utmost importance. Here, they are more of a suggestion. You can still kill enemies that are strong against your attack type with ease if your strength level is overwhelming enough. And perhaps more importantly, you can equip accessories that change the character's attack type, thus allowing you to build a more balanced party while still keeping only characters with movesets that you prefer in your party. And going even further, you can increase the rare item drop rate if you have one character of each type in your party. But you can also increase the damage of a specific attack type if there's more than one character with that attack type in your party. So yeah, there's a whole lot of room to fiddle around and find out what works for you. Of course, there's the usual JRPG stuff happening in the background as well. You can level up and learn more skills, you can level up your skills individually, you can buy armor and weapons and you can craft them and enhance them as well, out to get the numerical advantage. But the thing with ease is, that skillful play is also possible with reflexes, not just grinding. So while you can stuff your face with a dozen heal potions during a boss battle, it actually feels much more rewarding to skillfully dodge the boss attacks before bashing their head in. Just don't expect me to show any good footage of that, since I still get hit when I try to dodge 90% of the time. God damn. But hey, speaking of bosses, they are really cool. They come with all sorts of gimmicks, like you having to fight them inside a giant cage on top of a spike pit that they can drop at a moment's notice, and even the more generic ones usually have an interesting weakness or pattern to exploit. My only problem is that a few of the bosses are just so much better than the rest of them that I honestly wondered why Falcom even bothered. Not because the other ones are bad, but because they make them look bad by being on a class of their own. Still, nice boss battles, I like them. I also want to give a shout out to the side dungeons. You see, every chapter there is a very spoilery side quest that you can take that will allow you to temporarily take control of another character who must brave some dungeons completely alone. He has no monstrum powers or party members to help him, and the dungeons are filled with one-hit kill traps and invincible monsters that can only be damaged by said traps, on top of normal monsters that he must beat using a rusty sword. It is far more brutal than the rest of the game, and the game itself even lets you skip them if you want, but honestly I think you should play them if you can every time they show up, because while they do slow the pace of the game like the Greenwald Nox, they have a very dungeon crawler style approach to clearing them that is much closer to classic dungeon crawler style games, and I was very surprised in a very good way by their presence here. It's not something that I think I've ever seen quite like this in the E-series. That being said, if that's not your style, they are skippable, which is more than I can say for the Greenwalds. And of course we can't talk about a Falcom game without talking about the music. The Falcom sound team are arguably one of the greatest composer entities currently alive, and once again they turned in some great work for the game soundtrack, but I'm sad to report that while the soundtrack is good and fitting, that's honestly how it is. Which is a bummer, since usually Falcom soundtracks are filled with amazing tracks that stick to your mind for quite some time after you finish playing the games, and yet outside of a short 30-second song that plays at the beginning of each Greenwald Nox, nothing stands out to me, which is a shame because I still have Sunshine Coastline stuck in my head to this day, and yet not a single track in this entire game comes close to that. On a better note though, the game also counts with a lot of good quality of life decisions, like allowing you to use leftover Nox from previous chapters as currency to buy all of the game's materials at any point in time, thus allowing you to easily craft new equipment even if you're missing out a few pieces of material. But it is still expensive enough that you are still encouraged to hunt down everything yourself. There are checkpoints everywhere, including inside dungeons, and you can fast travel from pretty much anywhere to anywhere at almost any time, even from inside dungeons to outside and outside to inside dungeons, right next to the last checkpoint you reached. It is a very welcoming experience, especially if this is your first Ys. So we have a good setting with an interesting setup and varied level design and fun boss battles and combat and good music, so everything must be good, right? Oh wait, I think I'm missing something that I was supposed to talk about. Oh yeah, the writing. Abandon all hope, ye who entered this section, for here be spoilers. Vague spoilers that won't actually spoil the actual events, and I think mostly will just give reasons for people to nitpick this video. But hey, I want to get this out of my chest, so if you don't like spoilers or ranting, please skip to the end of the video. There will be timestamps on the description. This was your warning, okay? Alright, now sit comfortable and let's get this over with. Okay, so I'd like to start by talking about the way the game was marketed. You know, all of that edge, that concept art, that darkness, that sadness, that incredibly detailed gothic clothing, gothic anime clothing. I'm not even sure how to describe that. That looked like it came out of Code Vein. You know all of that? Well, forget about that. That is not representative of the game's writing and story at all. This isn't a darker Ys. In fact, I'd argue that the previous entry was darker, it reached into some darker and more melancholic places. This is just pretty much standard Falcon writing. So this is not a bad thing, you know, it's just a bit misrepresentative of what the game actually is. So if you came expecting a deep, darker experience, well, Falcon did not deliver in that regard. But that is not necessarily bad though. Okay, so the game's story is slow. It is very slow. It took me about 5 hours before I had 3 characters in my party to make a full party. 5 hours before we got introduced to 2 characters other than Adol. And yeah, that kind of sets the pace of the game. And if you play the previous game, I'm talking so much about Lacrimosa of Dana, I might as well just review that. But anyway, if you remember the previous game, there was this side plot at the beginning of the game that I thought would carry into the rest of the game, but instead it just showed up, did its thing that didn't really affect much at all, and it did have some consequences, but you know, on the grand scheme of things, it was basically nothing. It was just a side distraction before the actual story could begin, and that means that the beginning of Lacrimosa is very, it's kind of hard to replay because I know that those plot points aren't actually going to have deep implications on anything that is going to follow. Well, that is kind of this game, except that this is kind of 3/4 of the game is useless. You just go around, each chapter has a monstrum dedicated to it, and you get to learn more about them, you get to learn more about their backgrounds, but their backgrounds aren't really all that particularly interesting. They aren't one-note characters, but they aren't the deepest characters. They don't really need hours upon hours of backstory and gameplay and chapter in order for you to get them. So it's really weird that you just spend the first 6 or so chapters of this game just... Wait, hold on, let me check here. Yeah, you spend the first 6 chapters of this 9-chapter game just collecting 1 character per chapter and learning all about their backstory, which is most of them are unrelated to the actual thing that is happening, you know, to the actual main plot. I'd say half of them are connected. No, perhaps even less. Perhaps only 2 of them have a deep connection to the main plot. Some of them just pop up really late into the game and they have no connection to the actual main plot of the game. I mean, it's a bit harsh to say they have no connection. They have some connection, but what I mean is they don't really give anything that advances the main plot. Instead, the main plot is advanced by these small clues that tie together in the end in a way that it's just, there was no way you could have predicted that would have happened from the little clues that are given, and they're given so sparsely that it's just, you just need the bad guy to show up and give an exposition dump as to what is actually happening in the end. And the worst part is, there are lots of points in the game where you meet characters who know stuff, and they just like, no, you must see the truth with your own eyes. No, we can't tell you. Except they totally could have told them. They totally could have told the main characters. In fact, when you actually get to the plan of the main villain, if he actually told the characters what was happening and he actually got them on his side closer to the beginning of the game instead of acting all mysterious, that would have been like way better plan than just antagonizing them the entire game. And then the worst part is, this bad guy that has been built up out of these chapters gets defeated on the penultimate chapter. He just dies. He just straight up dies. And then another villain shows up and he's like, oh, I'm the bad guy all along. Look, I was all of these characters. I was disguised as all of these characters that appeared before in the game, except I didn't remember a single one. Were there like background NPCs? There must have been something. Maybe I'm just stupid, okay? That is a possibility. Sound off in the comments if I'm just stupid and you totally got what they're going for, because I didn't. The characters just showed up and I was like, who the hell are these people? I don't know a single one of them. Maybe I'm just have really bad memory. Completely possible that I have really bad memory. But then this guy just shows up and then he ends the plot, kind of, and then the final chapter starts. And like, if this guy showed up and he just was like, I was the bad guy all along, and then the game ended in a cliffhanger, that would totally have been a very Trails-like point to end the game. Instead, the final chapter just feel detached from the rest of the experience, because now you got this completely new character. And it's not that the plot completely changes, no, because the plan of the character and what is currently happening with the main characters and their relation to this new villain continues and carries into the new chapter. But it's just so weird, because it feels like we've been following a plot from first chapter to 8th chapter, and suddenly there's this cut in the plot, and if there was a time skip or something weird like that, I would have totally believed it. And there kinda is. It's a small 3-day skip, if I'm correct, down to the final chapter, from the penultimate chapter to the final chapter. But it's just so weird, because the final chapter feels like it's building up, it's trying to build up a completely new villain out of nowhere for a completely new plot point. It feels more like a weird sequel that is completely unconnected, and this guy just shows up out of nowhere. And of course there's other exposition dumps and stuff for you to actually make sense. And then when the main characters confront him at the very end, it's so weird, because his plan is good. It's good, but the guy is an absolute asshole about he goes about it. You know, it's a very does the end justify the means thing, but then his plan just goes completely off the rails, so you can have a final boss battle and stuff. So, you know, we never actually get to question the ethics of letting this guy run. You know, do the main characters need to defeat this guy because he's going to do more evil, even if what is going to do right now is good? You know, there could be some good ethic conflicts like that, some good moral dilemmas to be solved, but no, hijacked by another boss, and then the game just ends after that. So yeah, it's a very weirdly paced, very weirdly written, absolutely frustrating with the amount of times characters could have just told other characters vital information, but they don't, just so that the game can keep the mystery going, except that the clues are so sparse that I just didn't give a shit about the mystery. I thought that it wouldn't have a satisfying conclusion, and it didn't. If it had a satisfying conclusion, I would have been really surprised, but it didn't. So anyway, Adol saves the day, and the game has a much happier ending than the previous game, which is weird because of the dark and stuff. And yeah, I kind of just spoiled the whole plot of the game vaguely. I'm not gonna tell you anything. Play the game, maybe you are going to enjoy this. Maybe you are going to find some enjoyment out of this, and you're gonna be like, oh no, this plot totally clicked for me. But as for me, this plot is a mess. And I just have to ask, am I getting old? Have Falcon games always had writing that just was bad, like these latest games, and I just got old and I started noticing it? Because to me, Falcon games writing was always good. I always felt like Lacrimosa of Dana had some good writing, it had good characters, they had good backstories, it had a good mystery, but they had this sort of way of preserving this mystery without having a bunch of people going out like, ooh, I know everything but I'm not going to tell about it, by taking place in a deserted island that, like, there was nobody there, but there was one person actually, but there was a mystery. Who this person doesn't know how she came to be there. I mean, she remembers her history, but she doesn't know exactly what is going on. And and there are exposition dumps and stuff, but I felt like the mystery carried itself much better. I feel like Falcon just doesn't know how to write antagonists. They just don't know how to keep the mysterious vibe going. They just don't know how to give them proper motivations for them to not tell the main character's information. And if this happened once, if like the writer just needed them to meet the antagonist for the story to flow better, and the antagonist just said, I can't tell you anything, once, I would forgive them. Because like sometimes you just need to make a little bit of sacrifice to keep the pacing of the plot going, but instead you just repeatedly use the same thing, and it's just really, really fucking annoying, especially since the payoff is absolute bullshit, it's absolute garbage, and that's the point I want to reach. Was Falcon games always this annoying? Not even technically bad per se, but just this annoying, Have I just gotten old? Because to me, Falcon story were always, at the very least, serviceable. They might have not been the best plots, they might have been focused more on gameplay, but they were at least, serviceable. They were downright bad, downright damaging my experience. And yeah, unfortunately, I can't say that is 9 Monstrum Nox has a good story or a good plot or even a serviceable one. It is one that actively annoyed me and lessened the experience for me. But hey, that's just my opinion on the story. You might come up with a completely different opinion. So okay, it's time we just reach the summary and the conclusion about Ys 9. Is Ys 9 a good game? Yes, it is a great game. Can I recommend it? Yes. Can you play this as your first Ys game? As I said before, yes. But I'm going to contradict myself just for the ending of this video to say, yes, this can be your first game. Any game can be your first Ys game. My first one was Oath in Felghana. But if you really want a window into the modern party Ys era, if that's where you want to start with the modern Ys games, just play Lacrimosa first. Because I think that's just going to give you a much better first impression about Ys. That's not to say Monstrum Nox is bad, it is a good game, you can start with it, and actually maybe it's a good idea to start with it and then go to Lacrimosa, which is better. Maybe, it's all subjective, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Can I recommend this game? Yes. Was it worth the price of admission? Yes. Even if the story was incredibly annoying. If you can handle that, then if you can just ignore the story, if you can block it out, like I couldn't do that, then this game is pretty much like really, 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 really good. The story just takes it down a few notches. But yeah, that's my final assessment of Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. Let's just cross our fingers that next time the soundtrack will be even better and the story will be at least inoffensive. They did already said they're cooking something up for Ys 10 and I hope it's really good. I hope they really just take off all of the brakes. But anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for coming by and watching this, and remember to do all the stuff YouTube needs to feed the algorithm monster, and I'll see you guys next time.